Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, my name is Ali. I'm a junior doctor working in Cambridge, and in this video I want to talk about 3 fantasy book series that I discovered last year and absolutely loved. Number 1, the Mistborn series by Brandon Sanderson. Number 2, the Kingkiller Chronicles, of which the first book is The Name of the Wind by Patrick Rothfuss. And number 3, the Stormlight Archive, again by Brandon Sanderson, of which the first book is The Way of Kings. Before we get started, I just want to say how excited I am that this video is being sponsored by Audible. Audible is the biggest platform for audiobooks in the world, and I've been using Audible. I've been a paid subscriber of them for the last 18 months or so. If you want, you can sign up to a free trial of Audible by going to audible.com/Ali Abdaal. Or if you live in the US, apparently you can text Ali Abdaal to 500 and that'll magically text you back like a link that lets you sign up for the free trial. And with the free trial, you get Audible for 30 days and you can download any of the books I'm going to mention in this video, because they're all available on Audible and they're all really good on Audible because I've been listening to them on Audible. You can download them all and you can decide if you like it. Okay, so the first series I want to talk about is the Mistborn trilogy by Brandon Sanderson, and the first book in that is called The Final Empire. It's set in this post-apocalyptic world that's ruled by this evil guy called the Lord Ruler, who's got these mysterious superpowers that no one knows anything about. Within the series, we follow the story of 2 members of the Scar population, i.e. the underdogs. One of them is called Vin, and she is a girl who used to be like a farmer and then ends up moving to the city. And we've got a guy called Kelsier, who is the head of a crew of thieves, and they try and steal from the nobility and give to the poor, and are all ultimately trying to overthrow the final empire. Alongside this world, we have a magic system, which is very, very interesting. It's not a case of waving a wand and casting a spell. Instead, it's a case of different metals having different properties, and there are some people of the population who can eat certain bits of metal, which sounds weird when I say it out loud, who can eat certain bits of metal and then can burn those metals inside their own body to then get the power that that metal grants. So for example, you might be able to burn pewter and that would give you super strength, or you might be able to burn aluminium or steel and that will allow you to telekinetically push and pull different metals, and that would, if used appropriately, would allow you to fly by hopping from metal to metal, weird stuff like that. But that does make a lot of sense. And that's one of the things I really liked about this particular series. Everyone is constrained by these laws of physics that are created in this world. And it's very, very clever when you've got 2 characters fighting one another, how they use the laws of physics and manipulate these different metals to get the advantage, and how they use that to fight. It's all very cool. The reason it's called Mistborn is because there are a few very, very rare people in this whole population who are Mistborn, i.e. they were born with the power to burn all 8 of the metals. And we find that Vin is the main character and Kelsier, who's the other main character, these both are Mistborn, and Kelsier has been doing it for a while. Vin just kind of finds out that she's a Mistborn, and Kelsier kind of trains her up. So you get this duo forming where, it's kind of like a coming-of-age story. Vin finds out that she's a Mistborn, and over time her abilities improve. And I don't really want to give away much more than that, because you can probably read that from the blurb of the book. But it's really, 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 really good. It has adventure, it's got a bit of action, it's got a lot of interesting political and moral things within it as well. To what extent are the poor people morally justified in attacking the rich people? There's this whole kind of backstory about it that you discover as the trilogy progresses. There's all this weird stuff about the Lord Ruler and the Final Empire, and it all builds to a very, very interesting climax. After finishing the Mistborn series, it was January 2018, and I was on my GP placement in this town literally in the middle of nowhere. It was like a 2-hour drive from Cambridge. And after I'd finished the Mistborn trilogy and then read the other 3 books that were released on top of that, which are set in a kind of more modern sort of world, but still based on similar concepts, after I finished those 6 books, it was January, we were on this placement with not really much to do apart from, just preparing for our exams. And I was feeling super depressed, so I said to my housemate Rachel, who was living in this cottage with me, I expressed my disappointment that I'd finished these books, and I was like, I don't know what to read next. I don't think anything is ever going to come close to this. And she said that she would highly recommend The Name of the Wind by Patrick Rothfuss, and said that that was the best fantasy book she'd ever read. So then, my eyes lit up and I immediately bought it on Kindle and also bought the audiobook because she recommended that the audible narration of it is really, really good. And then I started reading it, and I don't know where the next 8 hours of my life went, because I was literally sitting on the reclining chair in this cottage in the Norfolk coastline and reading The Name of the Wind by Patrick Rothfuss, and it was so good. And then I remember we were going home the following day, going back to Cambridge, so I put the audiobook on in the car and we just kind of resumed where I'd left off on Kindle, and the narration is absolutely stellar. Again, this is a sort of coming-of-age story. I'm an absolute sucker for coming-of-age stories, but the format is a little bit different. So we start off with this kind of, again, almost a post-apocalyptic world, I can sense a theme here, where we follow the story of this guy in an inn. He's an innkeeper. We hear some stuff about the inn, and it's a bit, and there's like demons and stuff, and bad things are happening around in the world, and everyone's talking about how terrible the world is. And this guy, the innkeeper, his name is Kut, he's all mysterious. And then we get a visit to the inn from this guy called Chronicler, whose job it is to write down the stories of famous people. And we found out very quickly that actually the innkeeper has this massive, massive backstory and is like a wanted man by the kingdom and has all these special powers that have been attributed to him through stories over time. And what happens is that this innkeeper, who's like 35 years old or something at this point, decides to sit down with the chronicler and tells his story from when he was like 5 years old onwards. Essentially, it's another one of those, kid grows up and finds out that he's a wizard sort of stories, but not like that. Just like, it's really hard to describe a book or the plot of a book in a few words without making it sound really lame. But there's this kid, his name is Quoth. He's very prodigious, he's got a lot of talents, he's very clever, very quick-witted, and he goes around with this troupe of circus performers. And then one day when he is a bit older, an arcanist comes to the circus and starts teaching him about, magic and the arcane. And then once he's learned a little bit of magic, then some like really terrible stuff happens, which I don't want to say because it's a big spoiler. And that was like, oh my god, like what the hell kind of moment for me when I found that out. And then we kind of get a lot more of the backstory, and then he goes off to this university, which is the University for Magic Tricks. Again, sounds really lame, I apologize, but it's really, really good. And he goes to the university, and most of the book is set at the university, and we talk about his escapades there and how he makes friends, how he actually gets into the university, even though he's underage, which is all very interesting. And there is a very kind of dark undercurrent running through the whole thing where this guy, Quoth, is trying to find out information about some evil, superpowery, godlike creatures who did bad stuff to him. And that's kind of the undercurrent of this. But it's all like, there's a very good mix of where they go to lectures and they have fun, and they, there's a bit of banter, there's a bit of, friendly rivalry that becomes unfriendly rivalry. There's a little bit of romance. It's always nice to get a little bit of romance. And it all works towards building up this backstory of who is this guy, Quoth? How is he so famous for having all these amazing things, all these stories about these amazing things? How do we ultimately get from this really nice, almost flowery butterfly world where he's a circus performer to 30 years later, this post-apocalyptic world that's overrun by demons where he becomes a wanted man? And that's a very, very interesting story. So The Name of the Wind was the first one, and The Wise Man's Fear was the second one. Both of them are absolutely incredible. Like at one point, I had to drive to Manchester and back for a wedding, which took like 8 hours in total. And my mum and grandma were sleeping in the car, but I was listening to The Wise Man's Fear audiobook. And it was just so good. It was absolutely bloody incredible. And it just made the time absolutely fly. Sometimes it was getting to the point where it was getting to a really good bit, and I'd just kind of get home, put my AirPods in, lie on the bed, and just kind of listen for like 4 hours. And it was like really, really good. So I'm so glad that I used the audible narration to draw out the enjoyment of the series. And then when Doors of Stone or Walls of Stone or whatever the third one is going to be called, when that comes out, I'm hoping the audible narration comes out alongside, because I don't want to devour it on Kindle. I actually want to savor it on Audible, if that makes sense. So yeah, highly recommend The Name of the Wind. I would kind of recommend reading Mistborn first. If you haven't read any of these, start with Mistborn, because Mistborn is a bit more fast-paced. The Name of the Wind, it can get a little bit slow at times. The Wise Man's Fear can get a little bit slow at times. If you're experienced in the fantasy genre, then you will not mind these slow bits. In fact, you'll probably appreciate and savor them. Whereas if you're in the market for like a fast-paced thing, Mistborn definitely covers that base a lot more. So I'm glad I read Mistborn first, because then it allowed me to savor the experience of reading the Kingkiller Chronicles by Patrick Rothfuss. And the final series that I want to talk about is called the Stormlight Archive, again by Brandon Sanderson, the same guy who wrote the Mistborn series of books. Before I talk about that, I just want to mention that Brandon Sanderson, all of his books are set in the same cosmere, the same kind of universe, but they're all in different worlds within the same universe. So actually, you do get a little bit of overlap between some of the characters, and you get kind of recurring themes, and you get certain characters that start off in one book and then appear in another book for a quick cameo. And there's a lot of mysteries going on in this whole universe, and from watching interviews and reading his website, it seems like, over the next like 20 years or so, as he releases more and more books, stuff will start to coalesce, and theme and characters that we saw for a little bit in Mistborn then appear in Stormlight Archive, who then appear in this other series, and the whole thing is apparently supposed to tie together in like a really planned out way, which is really cool. Like, I love the idea that there's a plan for all of this. And even though Mistborn and Stormlight Archive and all these books are just bloody incredible on their own, they're part of a broader picture. And it's so exciting to think that for the next 20 years there's going to be a solid 1 or 2 books coming out every year that's going to fit inside this narrative, and yeah, it's going to be really cool. Anyway, Stormlight Archive, the first book of that is The Way of Kings. Now this is a massive, massive book. I didn't really appreciate how big it was because I've been listening to this series entirely on Audible, because by this point, you know, I started listening to this, I think, in like September 2018 or something like that. I can't even remember when. I started listening to it, and I remember thinking that there is no way I'm going to get these books on Kindle, because I just want to make sure that I savor the experience of all of it. So I've been listening to these exclusively on Audible, and I just didn't really appreciate how long they were. Like, I knew that it takes about 50 hours to get through each one. But then I saw the physical books in like my friend's place, and like, they're bloody massive. So like, if you look at the book, I think it seems very daunting, but actually if you listen to the audiobook or if you get it on Kindle or whatever you like, then it's a really good narration. It's a solid many hours of entertainment. And actually the main reason that I now listen to these exclusively on Audible is because it encourages me to go to the gym. Anyway, let's talk about the book itself. The first one is called The Way of Kings. Now this is more like, you know, the standard fantasy book that you would expect. That's sort of like Game of Thrones, in that it's we hear the story from multiple different characters' perspectives, and at the start we don't really know what's going on. We're like, we get a little snippet of this, a little snippet of that, but then after a while stuff starts to kind of combine and you start to build up the picture in your head. I think the start of it is a bit slow, but you know, once you battle through the first few chapters, it becomes absolutely incredible. So what's it about? We follow the story of a few different characters. Firstly, there's a guy called Kaladin, and he, you know, we start off in the present and then we find out snippets of his backstory, and he is the son of a surgeon. He grew up training to be a surgeon, but then he gets conscripted into the army and becomes really good in the army, but then he gets chucked out away from the army, and we're not quite sure why, and he becomes a slave. And as a slave, he tries to revolt, he tries to lead his fellow slavers out into freedom, but that never works. And it's a very sad but also very inspiring story of, you know, this one guy and how he's being downtrodden so much. He's in this absolutely horrific circumstance, but finds the will to bring his people together and to try and rise up. And again, that sounds really lame when I explain it, but it's really, really good. So he's kind of one character. He's this warrior turned slave surgeon sort of guy. Then we've got this other person who is a girl. She goes to this city to try and become the apprentice of this famous, powerful woman who's like a scholar. So this girl is super into art and history and stuff. But actually we find out that while she's there, she's not just there to be a scholar, she's there to steal from this lady and to try and bring her family back into repute, because their family is a bit screwed because of some stuff that their father did. And again, there's a whole backstory behind that. These characters start off with zero interaction, but then as the series progresses, they start to interact more and more, and it's all very interesting how it comes together. And I don't want to give too much away because it's just so good. And I appreciate now that, you know, thinking back to this last hour that I spent recording this video, a lot of it is me just saying how good something is. So if you trust me, then, you know, take my word for it. This is a bloody incredible series. It's so good. It's a bit slow in some places, but again, I'm glad I read this third, you know, Mistborn, then Kingkiller, and then this one, because now even in the slow bits, I kind of still savor them. I recognize that there's going to be hints and stuff for all the mysteries throughout even these slow bits. And then when it gets to the really fast-paced bits, that's when, you know, this was probably the most exciting out of all the books that I'd read last year and this year, because I found myself, like, I'd be listening to the audiobook in the car or at the gym, and it would get to like a really good bit, and then I would just get home and sit on the sofa and just, you know, have a cup of tea, and for the next like 8 hours I'd just sit there listening to it, and it's just so good. And I genuinely had tears in my eyes at several points where they were like, oh my god moments, where like serious stuff was going down and I just couldn't even fathom how this was all coming together, and it was just incredible. So yes, that is The Way of Kings, which is the first book of the Stormlight Archive. The second book is Words of Radiance. The third book is Oathbringer, which I'm currently listening to, and then he's writing the fourth and the fifth one, and there's going to be another 5 books in the series over the next 20 years or so. So the really nice thing about this is that if you start reading or listening to these books now, then you'll have a solid 20 years of solid entertainment ahead of you, because Brandon Sanderson is going to deliver, and it's going to be wonderful, and I really can't wait. So that brings us to the end of the video. Before we wrap up, I just want to say a big thank you to Audible again for sponsoring this video. I have been gushing about Audible for the last 1 year since I started this YouTube channel. It's just an incredible service, and actually I'm going to make a video at some point about the purchases that have added the most value to my life, and my camera is one of them, my Kindle is another one, and Audible is probably the third on the list. Like, I'm so glad I have an Audible subscription, and I'd be saying that even if they weren't sponsoring this video, so please don't think that, you know, the only reason I'm plugging Audible is because they're sponsoring this video, which is just like a really nice, happy side effect. So if you want, you can sign up to a 30-day free trial by going to audible.com/Ali Abdaal, and with that, you can literally download any of the books that I've mentioned in this video for free. So if you want to start listening to the Mistborn series or to start listening to The Name of the Wind, you can just sign up to your free trial of Audible using my link, and then you can get that book for free, which is wonderful. And I'll put links to all the Audibles and the Kindles of all the books in the description below. And if you're a viewer from the US, apparently you can text Ali Abdaal to 500 500, and that will magically send you a link to your phone. But yeah, Audible has like a massive library of audiobooks. It's the biggest library in the world of audiobooks, and each month they have these exclusive, Audible exclusive titles, which are either bits of theater or bits of literature or bits of other books, kind of how Netflix has their own original content. Audible has its own original content as well, which is really solid. And there's also all of the standard self-help books that you would expect for self-improvement, for working out, and it's just got a massive library of stuff. I use it personally mostly for the fantasy, the fiction stuff, because I think when it comes to non-fiction, I prefer having it on Kindle so I can highlight. But when it comes to fiction, I prefer the ability to savor it over a long period of time. Listening to people who are really, really good narrators narrating this whole story and doing all their fancy voices and stuff. So yeah, it's just absolutely incredible for that. So yeah, thank you Audible for sponsoring this video, and thank you for watching this as well. This has been very, very waffly. I'm not too good at doing this book review thingy. I did a previous video about 3 non-fiction books that changed my life, and that felt quite waffly as well. But, I quite enjoy doing this, just kind of chatting to a camera, trying to explain the plot of a book without giving too much away about the plot of the book, and then ending up just being like, just take my word for it, because it's really good, and I can't tell you why it's really good, because that would ruin it, but it's really good. Anyway, yeah. Mistborn, Name of the Wind, The Way of Kings, incredible books. Start with Mistborn, I'd recommend if you haven't read any of them. It's absolutely sick. Thank you very much for watching. If you liked the video, please give it a thumbs up. If you haven't subscribed to the channel, please consider doing so. Have a lovely day, and I'll see you in the next video. Goodbye.